Sepang is back on the F1 calendar as the Bahrain Grand Prix and not the expected Malaysian Grand Prix, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that this fantastic track is back on the calendar for the F1 fans. The Grand Prix is going to be known as the Gulf Air Bahrain Grand Prix in Malaysia, but that is not the only Grand Prix that is potentially returning to the calendar this season. Both the Qatar Grand Prix and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix are at risk of being cancelled, and according to F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali, these races will be replaced by races most likely in Europe. And while yes, I know that it is likely to be one circuit in particular, I want to talk about other potential circuits that I would like to see return to the F1 calendar this year as a replacement of the cancelled races, or potentially cancelled races. Also, be sure to let me know what races you would like to see return to the F1 calendar this year as a one-off return. They don't have to be realistic, I just want to know what races you want to see return to the calendar. Now, let's get to the video. So let's start with the first race that I really want to see come back to the calendar, and it's one of the races that is actually coming back to the F1 calendar next year, which is Portimao and the Portuguese Grand Prix. Now, listen, I know that the circuit is returning in 2027, but the track coming back 1 year earlier is perfectly fine with me. I really enjoyed both the races that took place in 2020 and 2021. The circuit itself is often described as a roller coaster circuit, as the track features a lot of elevation change and blind corners. It is 16 corners of pure fun, with a mixture of heavy braking zones and some very fast corners, which makes it a lot of fun for the drivers to push at. In both 2021 and 2020 Grand Prix, we saw Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes win the race both times, as the Mercedes car dominated around the track, but we also saw a risk of rain get involved to mix up the race a bit, meaning that the very first race we saw drivers start on soft tyres fly past those who started on medium tyres, but with how possible it is to overtake on the track, once the medium tyres were up to temperature, the drivers on those mediums were able to get back ahead of the slower cars that were on the softer tyres. Honestly, I wish this race stuck around for longer than the 2 seasons that it was on the calendar. So, thankfully for me, this race is actually returning next year. As much as I would like to see it return this year, and I really would like to see it return, it's unfortunately not realistic, because the Portuguese Grand Prix at Portimao have already said that they are not going to be able to host a Grand Prix this year, and the reason for that is because they are preparing to host the race next year. They want to make sure all the facilities are up to scratch, and they want to make sure that the track is in perfect condition for when the cars get out onto the track. They don't want any issues such as what we saw in Istanbul, which is pretty understandable. Another circuit I would like to see return is, well, Istanbul, speaking of that track, and the Turkish Grand Prix. Once again, this was a circuit that returned to the calendar thanks to the COVID pandemic, with fantastic races in both 2020 and 2021, and both races were rain affected. For the 2020 Grand Prix, the circuit was resurfaced, however due to the tight turnaround, the circuit was not able to be washed properly, meaning that when F1 arrived, the circuit was very slick, and grip was incredibly low, and this was not made much better by the fact that it absolutely hosed it down with rain. But it then made for a fantastic race, where there was no grip at all for the drivers. In 2021, when it returned to the calendar, they had time to actually make sure that the circuit was ready for F1 cars to go racing, and with that, we saw another wet race, but the cars actually had grip, and we saw some fantastic on-track battling. Much like with Portimao, both of these races were won by Mercedes. In 2020, it was Lewis Hamilton as he won his 7th World Championship, but in 2021, it was Valtteri Bottas who won the Grand Prix. Much like with the Portuguese Grand Prix, the Turkish Grand Prix is making plans to return to the calendar officially next season. season, and therefore they probably want to make sure that the track is suitable for when it actually returns, so they don't have a repeat of 2020 where the cars had absolutely no grip at all out on track, which again does make sense. You want to make sure that the cars can get safely around the track, and you want to make sure that it is in a condition to provide a very good race. And when the circuit is up to scratch, I'm certain that the Turkish Grand Prix will make for a fantastic Grand Prix once again, which unfortunately means that, yeah, it's not returning this year as much as I would like it to. I just want to say if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button, as it really helps me out. Now, let's get back to the video. So what other races would I like to see return to the F1 calendar? Well, one track in particular that I would really like to see return to the calendar is the race at Hockenheim. Now, the last German Grand Prix at Hockenheim took place in 2019, and yeah, I know, it doesn't sound that long ago, until you realise that 2019 was 7 years ago. Now, call me an old man, but for me, F1 really should have a German Grand Prix. Look at the history of the sport. Even now, there is Mercedes and Audi in F1, two absolutely massive German manufacturers. Not only that, but some of the most legendary drivers in the history of the sport have come from Germany, such as Sebastian Vettel and Michael Schumacher. More so them than drivers like Mick Schumacher or Markus Winkelhock. Not only does Germany have some legendary drivers, but the circuit itself is a fantastic circuit for Formula 1. It has a mixture of fast corners with some heavy braking zones. The first corner on the track is a pretty high speed right-hander with a light brake before you actually reach the corner. After that, you then have a nice little run towards a much tighter right-hander. After that, the cars go down a very long straight before heading to a heavy braking zone at the hairpin, which historically has made for some great overtakes on the brakes. Then we have the arena section of the track, which has had some great moments historically on the track itself. Historically, this race has produced some great races, and thankfully for Hockenheim, unlike Istanbul and Portimao, they're not currently busy preparing for a race next year, which means that there is a good chance that if they really wanted to, they could host a race this year. They have the facilities in place already, and the circuit is used quite a lot, unlike Istanbul, so the track conditions should already be pretty good for F1 cars when they go to the circuits. If they did go to Hockenheim, that is, of course. There is growing rumours as I'm writing this that we might actually get a race at Hockenheim this year, and if it does end up being pulled off, then honestly, I am all for it. It will be interesting also to see how these cars get on at this track. I do admit they probably will struggle with the long back straight, but with corners like the hairpin and also the infield section, there's plenty of opportunity for the cars to recharge the batteries, so super clipping shouldn't be too much of an issue, which means it should be a fun race to watch. Another track that I would like to see return to the calendar is another German track, which is the Nurburgring. Yep, I'm sticking with Germany and another classic track. And like the first two races, this circuit returned to the calendar in 2020. In 2020, it was known as the Eiffel Grand Prix, and this track is honestly a brilliant circuit for Formula 1. No, I'm not talking about the Nordschleife, but the Grand Prix layout. This track features a decent sized pit straight with a tricky downhill braking zone into a tight hairpin, followed by some tight but somehow flowing corners. This is a very technical circuit, and one that challenges the drivers, because the circuit is fast, but it is very easy to overstep the mark and run off track. It also features some fast corners, like Turn 8, which is an uphill flat out left-hander known as the Schumacher S. It then has a long flat out zone before a very heavy braking zone into a tight chicane, making for a another great overtaking opportunity. The race was a feature on the calendar from the 1990s until the early 2010s, but dropped off the calendar after 2013 before the 2021 off return, and like Hockenheim, I am sure they could get the circuit ready for F1 in a pretty short amount of time, as the Nurburgring circuit is used a lot. I mean, it's used a lot. Now, let's move away from Europe a little bit to another circuit that I would personally love to see return to the calendar, and it's one that F1 has not been to for quite a long time, and that is the Fuji Grand Prix in Japan. The last Fuji race was in 2008, and it hosted the Grand Prix in 2007 and 2008, before it was dropped to see F1 return to Suzuka for the Japanese Grand Prix. But in those two seasons, they both produced pretty good races. The circuit features a fairly long pit straight followed by a tight right-hander, before it then opens up and drops down to a pretty fast left-hander called Coca-Cola, and then the long 100R right-hander before tightening up with a hairpin, and then we get to the back end of the track where it starts to get very technical with a chicane, and then some left and right-handers which are all pretty tight. Not only is the circuit great, but the scenery in the background is spectacular. I mean, it literally has Mount Fuji in the background. Obviously, Japan at this time of year is likely to be very wet, but so too are all of these European races, so it doesn't really matter. But I think it would be a lot of fun to see F1 go back there for a one-off race. Which brings us now to the track that is most likely to be returning to the Formula 1 calendar in 2026. And it is yet another circuit that returned to the F1 calendar during the COVID years, but it managed to stick around for quite a few years after that, and it is the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola. Yes, Imola is likely to be returning to the calendar yet again. It's kind of like that rash that you can never seem to get rid of. The circuit did return in 2020 and has stuck around ever since. The circuit is notoriously difficult for on-track overtaking and features an incredibly long pit lane, meaning that multi-stop races are very rare. However, there is one thing about Italy in December, and that is that it will very likely be raining, which will definitely add a level of spice to the Grand Prix if it does end up returning to the calendar and being a season finale. Imola features a bunch of high-speed chicanes such as Tamburello and Villeneuve. It then has a much tighter chicane called the Variante Alta before the two Ravazza corners at the end of the lap, which are some tight medium-speed corners. The circuit, especially with the previous generation of cars, was honestly not that great for F1, but with these cars, honestly I do think there is a chance that we could get a better race than what we've previously seen. So despite the fact that I've said that it's very, very difficult for overtaking, there's a chance that we could get a good race, especially with that long pit straight, allowing for overtaking opportunities. But I do imagine that we will see the teams and drivers struggle with energy management down that pit straight. It is looking likely that we will get Imola and maybe even Hockenheim returning to the F1 calendar in 2026. But are there any other circuits that you would like to see return to the F1 calendar? I didn't include options such as Adelaide or Kyalami, due to neither of them actually being a Grade 1 track, but that doesn't stop you from potentially wanting those circuits to return. So if you would like to see those tracks return to the calendar, let me know below and tell me what tracks you want to see return. And if you did enjoy the video, then please do remember to like the video, as it really helps me out. Thank you all so much for watching.